Hello and welcome to Weekend Warrior Woodworking. My name is Derek Welker and today I'm going to be showing you how I created this herringbone style coffee table out of plywood and hairpin legs. So I started off with just cutting plywood down to essentially what would be the width of the pieces. So I used 3/4 inch plywood, and this is kind of where my problems first arose, is that I should have ripped the factory edges of the plywood to make sure that everything was square, because when I went to go glue them up, they didn't necessarily line up correctly, and I was left with some gaps, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So now I'm moving it to roughly 2 inches, which is essentially going to be the width of the table. And I moved the fence over to this specific dimension and cut all of the pieces, which should cut down on some of the sanding as well. I do want to point out that, I did end up with a lot of sanding because of not cutting those factory edges. So that's definitely one thing that you really should do at the very beginning. I then used this 90-degree Irwin clamp to get the first couple pieces started, because if you don't make sure that those first couple are square, it's going to cause a lot of problems downstream. So I used tightbond glue, and then I did use some of these Cobalt just hand clamps to make sure that they didn't move at all when I put the brad nails in, just because, obviously you want to cut down on the amount of sanding that you're going to need to do, and just make sure that you're going to try and eliminate as many gaps as possible downstream. So I sanded everything down, cut the edges off, and I was left with some visible gaps. So I used some glue. I just put some glue where those gaps were, and then I used some sawdust that I had from the table saw and from the palm sander. I used a little screwdriver to help push the glue down in, so that when I did sand it down, there would be glue in those cracks. So I just put some of that sawdust on top, and then I did use my thumb to go ahead and push it in. I do want to point out that I did use shellac on this when I was all said and done. And then I used some spray-on lacquer just to reduce the amount of time spent with the final coating. I was going to cut it completely square, but I'm pretty happy with that arrow design that I came up with. You can see some of the gaps here and how they filled in, and because you are working with plywood, everything's not going to be perfect, so you can see there's some little chips. I think it just adds a little bit of character, and overall I'm very happy with this. So one thing I didn't mention specifically in this video is that if you can't make repeatable clean cuts, I wouldn't really attempt this design unless you're only doing one pattern here, because if you're doing one pattern that's big enough to cover the area that you're looking for and you're just trying to cut the edges off, you'll have no issues with making repeatable, or the repeatable cuts won't really matter, because you're just going to cut off the ends. But in this case, because I am doing multiple patterns here or multiple rows, you definitely need to make sure that you got repeatable cuts for those seams. If you can't, you'll be left with a lot of gaps, and it will cause definitely some problems in the future. I did end up using shellac with a top coat of spray-on lacquer. I have used polyurethane in the past. I'm not a big fan of the wait time between coats, and I had never used lacquer before, so I wanted to try lacquer, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. I did use a trim router to do a little bit of quarter round on the edges, just to make it a little bit more pleasing and a little bit lighter. I did want to initially just cut this as a perfect square, but I think the way the pattern looks, this arrow style, looks a little bit nicer, and it's a little bit more of a conversation piece than anything. I have a couple more uses for this in the future. I might make some end tables and maybe use this for some front of like drawer faces. But if you have any recommendations for where I could use this or some applications, please let me know, and I will definitely maybe make some in the future. Thanks for checking out this video. Hit a like if you liked it, and I hope to see you in the next one.